I have lint rolled this hat so many times, and no matter what, cat hair is just on it. It's just gonna exist on this hat forever. Ben Mears returns to Salem's Lot after 25 years and discovers that things in this quiet little Maine town are not quite what they seem. That is to say, a master vampire and his human servant have bought the old Marston house, an old abode that towers over the town like a watchful demon. If you love vampires and have not read Salem's Lot, you need to change that. If you love the season of autumn and you have not read Salem's Lot, you need to change that. If you love Stephen King and haven't read Salem's Lot, put down whatever you're reading right this instant and read Salem's Lot. Salem's Lot is a classic, and not only the horror genre as a whole, but also the vampire subgenre. By the 1970s, vampire literature has gotten kind of old hat.
I have rolled this hat so many times.
Everybody tried to replicate Dracula to mixed success. Enter Stephen King, who, hot off the heels of his successful debut with Carrie, had an idea. What would happen if Dracula came back in the 20th century to America? Over dinner with his wife Tabitha, she responded with, he'd probably be run over by a yellow cab on Park Avenue and killed. So this is actually a reread for me, and actually I didn't actually read this copy, I listened to it on audiobook. And the narrator for that audiobook, by the way, whose name I'll put here, they're fantastic. Definitely listen to it if you're an audiobook person. I originally read this back in middle school when I first got hooked on Stephen King's work. Middle school was also when I was entering my vampire phase, which turned into a lifelong fixation on vampires. I made a video about it a few years ago, but in 7th grade, I legitimately told people that I was a vampire, complete with a list of names of people I drank from and fake blood samples. Middle school was an interesting time for me. I am pleased to say that after this reread, this book deserves its place on the mantle of iconic, brilliant vampire stories right next to Dracula himself. Speaking of Dracula, I actually finished reading that this year, and there will be a video review of that book, so keep your peepers peeled. The prologue to this book is one of the best setups that I can think of because it asks several questions that will be answered over the course of the novel. Who is this man? Who is this boy he's traveling with? They're not related. That's a little weird. What the fuck are they running from? As I mentioned at the beginning, Ben Mears is a novelist who returns to Jerusalem's Lot after 25 years searching for inspiration for his next novel. And that inspiration comes in the form of the old Marston house, former home of a hitman by the name of Hubie Marston, where at some point in Ben's childhood, he broke into this abandoned house and was spooked by a hallucination of Hubie Marston's corpse being hanged, turning around and looking at him dead in the eyes. Ben is quickly informed by the local townspeople that the home has been bought by a fellow by the name of Kurt Barlow and Richard Straker. However, nobody has seen Barlow. Straker is the one in public doing all of the work under the pretense that Barlow is overseas on an extensive buying trip to fill an old antique furniture store that they also purchased within the town, and to fill it with all these beautiful pieces of extravagant furniture. King does a wonderful job of interlacing the main plot with these vignettes of the townies going about their daily lives. You really get a good glimpse into the dark underbelly of a small town, and this sort of vignetting into other people's lives is something King will continue to do with future books, and it's always one of my favorite parts of them. It's a style of world building that really scratches a particular part of my brain in a good way. Minor spoiler here for one of the vignettes, but hopefully you all know that King is no stranger to killing kids in his books, and well, we do get one stressed, abused woman killing her infant child because it was just too much for her to bear. While that's probably the most disturbing one of these vignettes, there's a lot more where that came from. The characters, of course, are wonderfully written. Ben Mears and his quartet of sorts running around attempting to rid the town of vampires is exhilarating and never ever boring. Mark Petrie is a little badass. This 10-year-old kid discovered that his town is being overrun by vampires and decided, you know what? I think I can kill them all. What a fucking hero. Father Callahan is so good that he went on to co-star with Roland and his quartet in the Dark Tower series, which I still need to continue because I've only read the first book and I thought it was pretty okay. Susan Norton, Ben's love interest, on the other hand, feels a little underwritten and not fully realized to me personally. But early King and also older horror books in general always had issues with female characters, especially when they aren't the central focus like they were in Carrie, for example. Also, the romance between Ben and Susan isn't the best. It feels too quick to the jump for my personal taste. Nothing beats the romance in 11/22/63 for me. The reason I said you should read this book if you're a fan of the autumn season is because I fully believe that this is an autumn book. It is set in autumn. King's prose in describing the scenery is brilliant. If you like the tint of purple to your scenes, this is definitely one of the best out there. It plumbs the depths of gothic atmosphere that one should delve into when you're writing about vampires. I would describe this as Rothfussian, but really one should say that Patrick Rothfuss's prose are Kingian. There are some criticisms I've seen floating around about the pacing being a tad slow for some people, and I do agree it is a bit slow, but that's very deliberate. The first 2 acts of the book are kind of a slow burn build to this grand tension that pays off in Act 3, but also there's all these little different payoffs in both Acts 1 and 2. This is one of King's tensest works, especially when it's building up to a huge scare. For example, when we finally get to see and hear Barlow for the first time, literal chills ran up my spine. And I think the last horror novel to do that to me was probably King's own Pet Sematary. And then, as I mentioned, in Act 3, all hell breaks loose. You get all the action, you get all the gore, you get all the scares. It's just, it's delightful. I can't sing this book's praises enough. King fans need to read this book. Vampire fans need to read this book. I probably wouldn't recommend it if you're a beginner to King's work, but once you've really submerged yourself into his writing style, this is a delightful 3rd or 4th read. I think when I first read this, I was maybe 4 or 5 books deep into King's bibliography myself. And that's going to do it for this review of Salem's Lot by Stephen King. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos like this one, please consider subscribing. And until then, I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.